G'day, this is Andrew Price here from BlenderGuru.com, and in this video tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to render hair using cycles. So if you've been keeping your eye on the Blender community recently, you'll know that a lot of people are getting excited about rendering hair again because previously you could always render hair using the Blender internal rendering engine, as was used for the Big Buck Bunny film and Sintel. But for the new rendering engine, Cycles, you couldn't do it. It just wasn't built in yet, but it's now in there. The capabilities are in place. So you can now go ahead and start adding in things like grass, carpet, characters with hair. It's very exciting. A lot of people are testing it out now, having a lot of fun with it. And so now that we're on the brink of a new release of Blender 2.66, I thought it would be fun to go ahead and give it a try. So that's what we're going to be doing in this tutorial. So this tutorial isn't about actually setting up the particle systems, like actually combing the hair and cutting it and all that extra stuff. That is more for another tutorial. In fact, there's already a tutorial for that on Blender Guru if you wanted to check that out. This is for taking a model which is already in place, ready to go, and then just taking it over to Cycles and making it work. So yeah, we've got Sintel here, who has kindly volunteered for the project. Very nice of her. Yeah, so as you know, she was designed for the Blender internal rendering engine. That's what the whole film was rendered in. But we're going to be taking the model and taking it into Cycles and then changing the hair so that it works with the new Cycles rendering engine. So yeah. First things first, let's talk about why strand rendering is important. That's what it is called, by the way. It's called strand rendering. Hair, fur, they've all got different names, but it's all under the brand name Strand, I guess. So keep that in mind. So first thing that you can create using strand rendering is characters. Hair, big one, obviously. That's what it's all about, is the hair. So a lot of movies nowadays have got characters with hair. Brave, what was that other one? Tangled. They're all coming out now, and my theory for that is that rendering technology is getting better and better, and previously movies like that weren't really possible, but now that they are, people are sort of taking advantage of it, and it's working out well. So characters, big one. Another one is carpets. If you're into architectural visualization, interiors and things like that, you can't really get away, doing an interior without having something on the floor which is fluffy, whether that be a rug or a carpet. You've got to have it. I mean, you can cheat, just by having everything wooden or tiled or something like that, and it'll work, but it looks better if you've got something soft. So, yeah, this is a great time to start doing that. Another one is grass. You've got your interior covered. Now you've got your outdoors. So you've got grass. Obviously, that one's a big one, so that you can do that using strand rendering. You've also got clothing as well. That one sort of ties in with characters, but that's important if you've got fluffy clothing, like a Santa hat, for example. And then you've also got animals as well, a big one. Cats, dogs, mice, anything with fur, essentially. So that's what strand rendering is all about. So it's very important that, even if you're not into characters, it's got a number of other uses as well. Yeah, if you really want to get serious about, 3D animation and stuff like that, if you want to work for a studio someday, it's really important that you adopt and take on strand rendering because it is very important. Okay, first of all, let's talk about the old way of rendering hair or strand rendering in Blender. The old way was you start with a model like this, and then you go to the particle settings, you set up some things, you check strand rendering, all this extra stuff there. Then you go over to the material panel, then you've got a separate section for strand rendering with materials. You've got all those different values there. You've got to turn on tangent, shading, you got width, fade, all this other extra stuff. And then if you want to make the particles sort of fade out, you got to have like a mask. So you go to the texture panel there, add in a gradient, make sure that it's set to strand particles, the coordinates, little things like that. And then if you want to make sure that the particles are actually shaded so that they actually cast shadows onto the ground, you got to make sure that you're using lights with a buffer shadow, all this extra stuff. And really, there was a lot of fakery that went with it all, and it was one of the things that was a little bit confusing and hard to use. Is that there was too much going on in order to make it work, and if you adjusted one setting, you might find that this has a problem. There's lots of controls all over the place in different panels. You also had problems with the alpha channels as well, like if you had a background that you wanted to have. You want to change the background in a compositor or Photoshop or something like that. You would sometimes have problems with the alpha channels being off and wrong, and yeah, it got a little bit complicated. So yeah, it wasn't the best way. It worked for the time that it was used for, for rendering Big Buck Bunny and Sintel. It worked fine. But there's a better way now, and that is with cycles. Ta-da! So cycles, same thing. Basically, the particle systems remain exactly the same. The only thing that's changing is the actual rendering process. So most of the settings, basically right here in the particles right here, you've just got a very simple layout. You've got the shape, you've got the width of the particles, and you've got a rendering mode. That we'll get into in the hands-on demo. And then as well as that, you've got the materials of the hair as well. Now you'll notice that in this little screenshot here of the materials, that's just using the material nodes that are, that you normally use for a ground or any other material. They're not specialized materials, so you don't have to worry about like tangent shading or this or that or faking this or faking that. It's all pretty much the same as cycles. You just use, like a diffuse node and glossy node and all that extra stuff. You've got, if you want to get fancy, you've got like a hair info node, which I'll do a little demo of as well towards the end. But most of it behaves exactly the same as what you're used to with cycles already. So it's already pretty good to go. Okay. So yeah, those are the pros. It's faster and easier to set up. It's got the presets for the technical stuff, which we'll get into with the rendering modes. It uses the normal material nodes, as I just discussed, and also the results are more realistic overall as well, at least in my opinion. Some people will argue with me, I'm sure, but in my opinion, the results are more realistic. Okay, so it's time for a hands-on demo. We're going to be taking Sintel, and we're going to be making her so that she works with cycles. The hair part anyway. We won't be doing the skin or anything else. There's a bunch of other stuff already out there for that. Just doing the hair, keeping it short and sweet for you people out there with not enough time. Okay, so you can go ahead and download this model right here off the Blender Guru website. This model, by the way, is based off a model by Ben Danzy, which is the Sintel Light model. I've just taken that and then converted it so that it works with cycles. But the main thing that we're concentrating on right here is the hair itself. So if you go to layer 2, you can see you've got the hair all on its own. So it's just the scalp. It's not actually part of the head. But anyway, you can see exactly what's going on right there. Okay, cool. So let's just focus on that for now. Okay, cool. So provided you've got that scalp selected, go over here to the particle settings, and you'll see right down here towards the bottom, you've got cycles hair rendering, and then you've got the cycles hair settings. Now, if you don't see those options, by the way, then that will mean one of two things. Either the version of Blender that you're using doesn't have hair rendering supported. So this is 2.65, but it's a later build. So it's not an official release, it's a later build. So by the time, if you're watching this tutorial like a week later, then provided you're using 2.66, which will be the next version of Blender, then you should already have hair rendering supported. If not, you'll need to go ahead and download a newer build of Blender. And then once you've done that, you also need to make sure that you've got the device set to CPU, not GPU, because GPU is not yet supported for hair rendering. And then for the feature set, make sure it's set to experimental. But again, depending on the version of Blender you're using, you might not need to set it to experimental. But anyway, make sure it's set to CPU, make sure that's experimental, and then make sure you've got a version of Blender that supports it. Then you should be able to see this right here. So the first one we're going to look at is the cycles hair rendering, and you've just got one value, which is mode. Now these modes here are the ones that a lot of people get tripped up on because they've all got confusing terms and nobody really knows what they do except for the developers and people that have spent too long testing it out. Now really what all these values are here are presets. Essentially, really, if you wanted to get to the nitty-gritty of it, you've got custom down there. So if you click on custom, you'll see that you get all these different values here that's really confusing, and it'll give you a headache if you try and understand it without anybody, sort of walking you through it. But essentially, you don't need to use custom because these are presets. So when you change it to one of these, in the background, just imagine that it's changing all those settings underneath in order so that it works for different things. Now, what do all these different presets do, and when should they be used? For that, I have a slide, which I shall put up right now. Hair rendering modes. Okay, so these are those 5 presets there. So starting from the left, going towards the right, it is the fastest rendering with the least realistic results. And then the further you go right, you get the longer render times, but with the most realistic looking results. So you can see over here on the left-hand side, the fast planes rendering method, you get the lowest render times, but you can see it's pretty unrealistic. Now, this render mode is probably the closest to how it behaved with the Blender internal rendering engine. It looks kind of like a flat plane, which is tilted towards the camera. It does cast a shadow, which is cool, but it doesn't have any three-dimensional depth to it or anything like that. It's all pretty much... it's just a flat plane. Now, that's going to work for some things, like if the camera's far enough away, or, if you're just doing like hair on somebody's arm and it's not really in focus that much, you'll get away with that, and it'll be good because it's got a faster render time. You got the tangent normal. This is where it starts splitting it up into like individual planes. So you can see that with curved hair here, you've got gaps between, where it's curving and stuff like that. So that's one thing to make a note of. Now, that'll be good for some things as well because you'll get a little bit more shading on that. Now, this middle value here, this is the one that I recommend people use to start off with and for most things. I think for most things, true normal will work fine for you. Now, the reason for that is that at the true normal value, it's got a little bit of shading to it. I'm not sure if you can see it in this view that I'm giving you right here, but there is a little bit of shading on it. So it actually starts to become a cylinder right here. These individual hair strands are actually tiny little cylinders. And you can see, but with a little gap in between them, it's keeping the vertice count down to a low enough amount. Now, the accurate amount, this one here, this fourth value, I guess, fourth from the top. This one, I mean, to be honest, I don't exactly know what the difference between these were two. Somebody told me that it includes back facing, so you can have like transparency and translucency, but I find you get that with true normal anyway. So anyway, but I can see there's a little bit of shading in there, like in between the gaps of the cylinders, so that might be something you want to use as well. But then this one over here on the far right-hand side, it has the longest render times, but you can see that it is a completely smooth-looking cylinder. Now, this is one that, you shouldn't just jump to this immediately because it looks the best, because your render times, although you can see here this rendered in 4 seconds, this is only like 20 cylinders. 20 hair particles, sorry. Now, for the head of hair that's on Cintel, I think there's closer to like 500,000, I think it is. So, the render times are really going to jump up between these values here. So just keep that in mind. Don't just immediately jump to the one with the clearest and whatever best realistic looking results. In my opinion, smooth curves, this one should really only be used if you've got like the camera zooming in on like the fibers of the carpet or something like that. That's really the only time you should be using that. For everything else, go ahead and I'd say stick with true normal. That's my opinion. Stick with the default value and you'll be fine. And for the really advanced users out there, go ahead and switch it to custom if you want, and then you can have fun with all those confusing settings that you've got there as well. So let's jump back into Blender. Whichever one that is, not that one. Is it? No, it's this one. There we go. Okay, so we're leaving it now set to true normal. Okay, now we're going into the cycles. Ooh, you can go away. We've got the cycles hair settings. Now this one here, you've only got 3 values. You've got the shape value, you've got the width multiplier, which is the root, and the tip. So I'll just explain what these 3 are right now. Start with the root. This one is fairly easy to understand. This is just the size of the particle in relation to its, along its length. So the root is obviously the root of the scalp. So that's where the strand begins. And then the tip is what size it will be at the tip. So if I set this to be 1 and 1, then that would mean you would get one big long cylinder all the way down there, and it wouldn't taper off, it wouldn't get smaller, it would just be a big fat long cylinder. So I mean, I don't know, I was just trying to think of a use for that. Like if you had fibers of a rug, I guess, or grass, I think you might use that. But generally most things will taper off. So generally you'll have something that looks like that. You'll have a tip which is 0, and then you'll have this root, by the way, which by default is way, way, way too big. If you leave that set to 1, you'll get hair strands that are almost as big as the person themselves. In some instances bigger. Like I think that, like setting it to 1, you'll get like a hair strand the size of her face. So I don't know why by default it's set to something ridiculously high. You have to change this to something really low. Like you have to drop a few decimal points to get it so that it's usable. So for my render, I set it to 0.004. Somebody commented on Twitter, said that the hair particles were too big even then. So maybe cut it in half, go to 0.002. Now keep in mind that the lower value that you set this to, then obviously the thinner the strands of hair are going to be. So if you've got scalp that's showing through and she's looking a little bit bald, then you're going to have to increase the number of particles. So that's really what this is about. It's a game between, how, you want to get realism, obviously, but you also don't want to have to be using too many hair particles. Like I think the human head, I can't even remember. No, I think I read a value somewhere that said it was 100,000, but that can't be right. I think it's more than that. But anyway, I don't know what we're getting into anymore. We got to keep this value really low, 0.002 like that. And I'm going to keep the tip at 0 as well. This closed tip value here, by the way, that really should be under here. I don't think it should be up there. But anyway, the closed tip value should really come into play only if this value isn't 0. Like if you've got that something set as something else, then you want to make sure you've got closed tip so that it actually closes the tip towards the top. So otherwise it doesn't really matter as long as that's 0. Okay, now the next value is the shape value. Now the shape value will essentially define how that tapers off. So if you've got the root set to big and then you've got the tip set to something small, then if you leave it at 0, then it will go from a completely linear fashion all the way down to the front there in a completely straight, decreasing in value. But if you change it, then you get different results. How do the results look? Well, I've got a slide for that one as well. So this is a comparison of the different shape sizes. So you can see that the values, by the way, go from 0 to 1 in both directions, minus and positive. So if you go in the positive direction, then you can see that it tapers off rather quickly. So at 0.75, you can see that it becomes thin almost immediately. Now, I'm not exactly sure when you would actually want that because I'm not entirely sure what type of hair or fur would actually use that. But anyway, that's what it does. And if you set it to 1, just a standard 1, then you'll get like this little stump that appears out of the ground and there won't be anything above it because it will have tapered off so quickly that you can't actually see the thin strand above it. Now, if you go in the other direction, you can see that it's fatter and it stays fatter for a longer time before it then tapers off towards the end. Now, this is what we're going to be using for the human hair because I originally thought that the human hair starts really thick and then goes, basically stays at a 0 value. Like you would think that that's how it would go. But generally, like from plucking the hair from my girlfriend's head, I actually did that. I think I got sick of pulling my own hair out. I think I wanted to compare it to Asian hair because she's Korean, and also I just don't like plucking my own hair out. But anyway, you can see that if you have go ahead right now, go and pull out one of your own hairs, drop it on the table, and have a look at it, and you should see that the hair basically retains its value right up into the tip, where you'll see that it just slowly tapers off right towards the end. So for our value for Sintel here, not that one, I've got two blend files open. For our Sintel here, we're going to be using a shape value of minus 0.8, like that. So it's going to look very similar to this value right here, 0.075. It's close to that. So it's going to taper off just towards the end there. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. So that is now in place, and that's all you need to do in the particle settings. So those of you that did hair and fur and stuff using the old method of the internal rendering engine, you'll notice immediately that it is a lot quicker in the particle settings. There's not a whole number of options to choose from, so that's good. Now, in the material settings, we're going to go ahead and click on New Material. And really, you can actually render the hair just as this. Just set to diffuse, the default diffuse shader, you can render the hair. So to demo that, I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. And I'm going to show you how it looks just with the default, without changing any material settings. I'm going to show you how it looks. Just so that I'm not left waiting here forever, I'm going to turn down the number of children particles, which is like a multiple of this. So that, by the way, if you've downloaded the file and it's taking forever to render, just go to the children settings right here. Turn the render amount down to something else. Like I find for testing, like 20 is fine. I'll just set it to 50 so you can see it a bit better. But the normal value I set it to is 300. But anyway, I'm going to go to 50 right now. I'm going to give that a render and I will show you how it looks. Okay, so there's the finished render. Now you can see that most of the hair is blown out because the lights are too powerful behind it, and the color of the material is white. But you can see in this hair that's going over the hand here, you can see that it's rendering fine. And that is really all there is to it. Once you've set up those few things in the particle settings down there, all that's left to it is to just go ahead into the material nodes, just down here, like you would normally for any other material in Cycles, and just to basically make it so that it looks like hair. So the first thing we're going to do is basically add in a reflectiveness to it so that it's shiny. So the way that we do that is just like you would normally, go ahead and add in a glossy shader, then add a mix shader, combine the two. And I'm going to turn this down to be, let's go 0.07. I think that worked quite well. And then I'll change this glossy amount to be 0.08, like that. So that's going to give a fairly sharp reflection, but just slightly over the top of the diffuse shader right there. So then that's going to give it a little bit of a shininess to it. So different types of hair will have different values, by the way. So if it's like super sleek, like newly brushed, shampooed hair, whatever, for a shampoo commercial, you probably want to turn that, make it even sharper, and then turn that value up. And then that will give you different results. So again, you don't need to add in any special nodes or anything to set this up. This is just standard, you know, like this is the skin shader. You can see we're doing the exact same thing for the skin, a diffuse and a glossy shader like there. So it's nothing new. If you're familiar with Cycles already, you should already be prepared to, or should already be ready to go ahead and get into hair. Now, the only other thing that we're going to be doing is adding in a texture for our hair. Now, the reason for that, if I just go ahead and open it up and I'll show you what it looks like. Yeah, which one of these is it? It's this guy right here. So these are the textures that come with Sintel, by the way. So we're going to be using Sintel Hair Diff, which is short for diffuse. And we're going to go ahead and plug that into the diffuse shader right there. Now, I'll show you what this image looks like, and I'll show you why we're using it. Just pull this up. Let's go hair and bring this into place. Okay, so this is the image that we are using. Now, this looks probably to the naked eye like wood, and I'm guessing that's probably what the original texture was based off, like a picture of wood. But it's been sort of reworked in order to, I guess, work a little bit better with hair. Now, this isn't, by the way, the individual strands of the hair that's going to be mapped across there. It's actually mapping it using the UV coordinates of the scalp, okay? So nothing fancy is really going on here. All this map in the background here is doing is making it so that if you imagine that you took a human scalp and you stretched it out flat in some sick, awful movie, I'm sure they've done that, but imagine that you've stretched it out and then laid it across this this image right here. Essentially what you do is, essentially what this is doing is making it so the color value of this right here, where these particles are stemming from, it's stemming from there, and then that is going to be the color of the whole particle as it comes out. So if a particle is born, let's say right there, it's going to be a light brown color. And then if the particle is born right here, then that particle is going to be a white color, etc. for the rest of the mesh. So by doing that, you are going to get a mixture of mostly brunette hairs with a few little stray white ones, a few little gray ones, a few black ones, a few lighter brown ones, etc. And so that's the whole point of it, to get a variety of different hair colors, because hair generally isn't the same, like consistency all the way through. So it does look better. Like if you could just make this, you know, like a brown color, just sort of like drop that in there, and you could do that. And that's what I did originally. I think I set it to like a reddish color like that. And then I think it was Greg Zile who commented on Blender Artist and said, hey, you forgot the image texture. And I originally just avoided the image texture because I was like, meh, doesn't really matter all that much. It's just an image texture, doesn't really matter. But once you add it, you can really see the result. And I can see why the Blender team actually went ahead and did this because the hair does look a lot better with it. So you go ahead and you add that. And the only other thing that I would do, in order to give it less of a brunette look, I'm going to make it a little bit more of a redhead look. And so I'm going to add in an RGB curve. By the way, I did that too quickly. So it's, you press Shift A, then you go Color, RGB curves. And that is a new feature of Blender, by the way. They didn't used to let you do that, but now you can, so it's very cool. So we're just adjusting how that texture is going to look. So I'm just making it on the red channel, just bumping it up slightly, just like that, giving it a slight hump, and that's going to make that texture just a little bit red, and that's going to look cool. Now, the only other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that the light that shines through our hair here actually passes through onto the other side. And so the way I'm going to be doing that is by adding in a translucent shader and then adding in a add shader, not mix shader, it's an add shader. The difference is that there is no factor value. It's completely blank. So by adding in that translucent shader, I'm then going to take the output of whatever is going into the diffuse, which is this guy right here, and then I'm going to put that into the translucent. And by the way, if the translucent, like the light that passes through the hair, is too much, you can alter that by adding in a mix shader and just making it a little bit darker, like that. So if you just like add in a little bit too much dark, you know, like basically the higher value you set that, then the less translucency will come through. That's a little cheat tip for you. So just showing you that. And I'll move that back over there. But that should be it. By the way, if it's showing up white here and you want it to change color, just change the viewport color in the material panel right here. If I just make this a brownish color and then tab out of it and tab into it again, now it's a brown color, which is sort of more what we want. Okay, cool. So I am going to go ahead and give this another render and we shall see how it looks. All right, let's go. And 4 minutes later, we have this rather grainy looking render, but it does show that the hair is now rendering perfectly. And that's all there is to this tutorial. That's it, the end. If you wanted to get rid of some of that noise, some of that specklediness, obviously turn up the samples. I only used 200, but for my final one, I used 1,200. You can play around with that. And then if you are still finding that the hair is coming out to be too speckledy and noisy, generally the problem for that is that currently with the development of the hair is that it's not smooth yet. So you will still get some artifacts and things like that. So one way I countered it was by turning the resolution up to 200%. So it was rendering it at double what 1080p is HD. And then I took that file into Photoshop and then I scaled it down. And then by doing that, I then got some, oh, hello, there we go. I then got some nicer, crisper looking hair that doesn't have any of that speckledy mess happening to it. And that was basically all there was to it. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If anybody's curious how I did the background and stuff like that, it's pretty simple. I just rendered, so this is how it looks coming straight out of Blender, was just this, and actually on an alpha channel. So I used the transparency just by setting this, where is it, the film, I checked transparent, and then just rendered it to a RGBA file, and then you get that. Then I made it a black background. I added in some smoke, which was from the stock image site. What's that called? You know, the popular one, the stock image one. I can't even remember it. I'll put it in the comments or something. And then I added in some dust and hair just by painting it with a brush, just a few dots and specks like that. Then I added in this left spot right there, then added in a spot highlight and then some spot volumetrics just by painting it in and then removing it, erasing and stuff like that. And that was it. That was all there was to this this final image. Oh, and I also like did a bit of dodge on the face and stuff like that, sort of brightened up a little bit and here and there. Anyway, that's pretty much it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I am also really hoping to see a lot more hair renders coming out from the Blender community now that Cycles has the capabilities. Please go ahead, jump into it, and that's all there is to it. So thanks very much for watching. I will see you next time.